Hello, hello, and welcome back for episode 11. Goodness, of The Doc is In. This is again another one in the Embracing My Brokenness series, and this one is going to be talking about battling anxiety. Um, so, anxiety. I hear it so often now that it almost kind of sounds trite in today's society to say that you have anxiety. Um, I think that it's going to be important to understand the difference between stress and anxiety. So, when we're talking about stress, stress happens to everybody. Everybody has some point in their life where they are stressed. Sometimes the stress is at a higher level than normal, um, but stress is caused by just everyday living. And it can be any number of symptoms. It can be I feel fatigued. It can be just kind of scatterbrained, whatever the case may be. But your ability to manage stress is going to depend on the person. It goes person to person. When we're talking about anxiety, what we're talking about is a stress or a fear, and something that's real or perceived, and it usually results in a symptom that's more debilitating. So I may be stressed because I have to work, but I've never been so stressed. Well, I have been, I'll get to that, but at this moment, I'll put it like this. On a normal basis, I'm not so stressed about work to the point where I can't get up or I'm experiencing like rapid heartbeat or any of that stuff. So, when we're talking about anxiety, it's an above normal or excessive or irrational fear of things that other people would consider mundane. Um, Panic attacks are usually associated with anxiety. Um, Maybe it's just the fact that you're worried all the time. A lot of people, again, growing up in the South, a lot of people are like, oh, she's high strung or, tenderhearted, you name it. But honestly, a lot of time it's anxiety. There are several types of anxiety disorders, one of which being separation anxiety. And I think that's one that a lot of people have. I'll start with the three most common, in my opinion. Separation anxiety being number one. That's usually you find that in couples, and you also find that with children and their parents. So it's usually like a fear of being separated from someone who is really, important to you. So you can usually find that like when sometimes it's the parent instead of the child, where it's like, I don't know if I should go back to work because my child won't handle it well, and really the child's fine, but it's them that's like freaking out. Or you find it in couples when somebody has to leave for maybe business or for a family thing or whatever, and the other person is like, oh my gosh, like I can't sleep when they're gone, or, just the idea of them leaving is stressing me out. So separation anxiety is usually pretty easy to understand. Social anxiety disorder is another one. That's just, it's a fear of being humiliated or embarrassed in front of people. So as a result, you tend to just avoid it altogether. So I won't do anything that's going to call attention to me in public. So that could be as simple as um, walking in front. Like if there's a crowd, you refuse to be in the front or the back. It could be if you're in class, you don't want to raise your hand. It could be I don't want to order food. Like I'll tell someone else what I want and they can tell the waiter. I don't want to have to speak in front of people. And it may even like go to things like talking on the phone. I don't want to ever have to be essentially out front alone in any situation. The third would be generalized anxiety disorder. And usually I think, and I know that my clinical supervisor would love the fact that I'm about to say this, but usually that breaks down into a fear of loss of control. I'm going to be in a situation where I won't be able to control it. It's going to be unpredictable. Anything can happen. Usually, that person is going to be really worried and restless and irritable. It's going to be difficult to manage because of the fact that I am so concerned about this thing that has never even happened. Um, some others are things like panic disorder, and that's more so a fear of panic attacks or a fear of those feelings that come along with it, not being able to breathe, hearts beating, that kind of stuff. So they may be fearful of things like exercise. They may be fearful of things like sexual intimacy. Maybe they're afraid of going to places where panic attacks have occurred. I actually just watched something, The Biggest Loser, where the gentleman was saying that he had a heart attack in the gym on the treadmill. So now for him, he's really frightened when he's in the gym and he sees a treadmill. So things like that. Agoraphobia is not as common as it used to be, I don't think, but it's a fear of being in places where you can't get help or escape. So that person just usually won't leave the house. They're going to try and avoid any space that's crowded or enclosed. They won't leave the house, period. There could be a specific phobia. So specific phobias will all fall under, anxiety disorders, because think along the lines of like arachnophobia or I think it's hemophobia, the one where you're afraid of blood. When you're afraid of any specific animal, thing, place, all of those. And one of the others that is still fairly common, I think, is OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. It's like fear of, for example, when people are constantly worried about germs, or I'm afraid to, do anything that might hurt someone else, or like I'm going to wash my hands 50 times, or I have to, close the window this particular way before I leave the house. I have to unlock and relock the door this many times. Things like that are, obsessive compulsive disorder. My journey with anxiety. As I mentioned, one of the depressive symptoms and that I had was that I had a fear of failure. Unfortunately, oftentimes depression and anxiety go hand in hand because one can usually trigger the other. So it's not uncommon that if somebody tells you they have depression, that they also have anxiety. I had a real fear of failure, so I would get very anxious around like my performance in certain situations. Um, and I worked as a hotel consultant, and I worked for about 7 years in hotels. But when I got to the level of I was a consultant and I was like essentially visiting like a portfolio of hotels, it was really, really, really stressful for me. I was given a property here in Houston, and I was like, okay, so this is my property. But the property had all these issues. It had to be renovated, it had to have all this stuff done to it. And I remember at that time, I was in a relationship, and I remember going home, and I wasn't driving, I was in the passenger seat, and I got a text about the property. And now, again, at this time, I was very heavy. I was probably at or over 500 pounds, and I'm reading the text, and I just remember that feeling of, it's almost like I can hear my heart pounding in my ears. And I just remember like my chest tightening and feeling like I couldn't breathe. And at that time, I didn't know it was a panic attack. Again, I was overweight. It could have been a heart attack for all I knew at that moment. But I just remember like being like, I can't breathe. I feel like I'm gonna die. It was just the stress was becoming overwhelming, and it was to the point that I just couldn't handle it. Like I wasn't sleeping well. I would get up in the morning and just literally dread going into work because I was like, God, what now? What now? And it's like that feeling of dread and the panic attack and, the racing heart when you're thinking about a situation that has not even happened, and your heart is racing and you're short of breath and you're like, what the crap is going on? Those for me were like the warning signs, like I need to find a new thing. And the thing about it is, when you're talking about anxiety, your symptoms can be physical or psychological or behavioral. So the heart pounding, short of breath, being flushed, dizziness, sweating, headache, dry mouth, stomach pains, you'd be amazed at how much something like anxiety can truly like overtake your being. You can't relax. I can't get any sleep. Like my muscles are hurting. And that's another one with depression. When you're having these aches that seemingly come out of nowhere, but nothing seems to help it. Um, the worrying, the irritability, like always feeling on edge. Your dreams, if you do sleep, you're having these super vivid dreams. Your mind's racing, or to the adverse of that, you can't concentrate, and so you can't even get your thoughts together. Um, Behavioral things like you're just distressed in social situations, so you just avoid them altogether. Um, I remember for me, and speaking as a male, one of the scariest things to have happen is finding out like you've lost your sex drive as a result of the depression or the anxiety. Yeah, they can affect that too. So I mean, for me, that was probably the factor that said, "Hey, we got to do something different. You need to go to the doctor and figure something out here." Because like there's a lot of things that you can deal with, but as a young male, that was one that I just could not deal with. I'm sorry. Um, so yeah, um, anxiety is something I think that is just interesting in the way that it can kind of come on you out of nowhere, and you just kind of have to figure out how you're going to deal with it. For me, I've learned to cope quite better because, again, as I mentioned, I tend to work off a lot with physical activity. I read a lot. I had to find things that helped me calm down. Um, one Pretty recently, I mentioned one of my nephews made me a rock, and it seems like inconsequential, but it's a stone that he hand painted, and I keep it with me, and it sits in my pocket. So when I am beginning to feel a little out of sorts, I just hold on to it. Holding on to it helps me to ground myself. And if you need that, then I mean, it may mean standing with your back to a wall and your feet on the floor, um, just to kind of give yourself a sense of safety. Um, for some people, that's I'm going to the car and I'm just going to sit quietly. Um, Everybody's anxiety can be triggered differently, so you want to do what it takes to bring yours down. I'm not a fan of self medication um, because ultimately it's going to be something else you're leaning on, and what happens when that's not there? Um, there are a lot of ways to handle anxiety. Finding new coping skills, going to therapy. You can try, if your anxiety is at that point where, hey, maybe you're beyond that, see a psychiatrist. Maybe look into some type of medication to help you. The biggest thing is, again, seek the help you need. Um, if that's I need to talk about it, talk about it. If that's I need to find a coping skill, something like yoga to help me center, do it. Make sure that you're giving yourself the time that you need. I feel like anxiety largely comes when we don't give ourselves any time for self care. And so it's like in everything kind of going haywire in your body and all this other stuff, it's just like it feeds into one another and creates one huge snowball of anxiety. So I do encourage you self care. Make sure that you're taking a minute for yourself. All those problems that you're worried about today will still be there tomorrow. And at some point, we have to be able to say, you know what, you're here now, you'll be here then, whatever. Let me just go ahead and get a break and get some rest. Um, Again, I'm a person of faith. I believe in prayer. If prayer isn't your thing, call it meditation. Take some time in the morning before you get into the hectic activities of your day. Take a little bit of time and just stop. Wake up and stop for a second. Think quietly. Meditate on maybe what you're doing in the day. Maybe meditate on why you're happy you woke up. Um, Give yourself a little bit more time. Give yourself a little bit more care. Some of us can give the best of us to everyone else, but we don't give it to ourselves. Give yourself some love today. So when I say love yourself, I really mean it. Love yourself better than anybody else can. Love yourself today. Love somebody else. We'll all be better for it.